is Monday. It's the 9th of June. You're watching Arirang, Korea's only global network. Live from Seoul, I'm Moon Geon-young. Now, as the nation slowly recovers from the recent Sewol-ho ferry disaster, and now with the local elections over, the Korean government says it's putting all of its focus on spurring the economic recovery. Arirang News Yoo Li-an has our top story.
이번이 마지막이라는 생각으로 어렵게 살려낸 경제 회복의 불씨를 더욱 크게 살리고 우리 경제의 재도약을 이끌어서 대한민국의 희망을 만들어 갈 것입니다.
President Park Geun-hye has put economic revitalization at the top of her agenda, and she's vowing to pour all efforts into carrying out her 3-year economic innovation plan announced back in February. The first part of the 3-part plan is public sector reform, which has been under the spotlight since April's Sewol-ho ferry disaster. A major step in the public sector reform is cutting debt levels at public organizations by tightening lax management. With the reforms in place, the debt-to-equity ratio was dropped to below 190% by 2017 from the current 220%. But since the government came under fire for mishandling the ferry disaster, the focus has shifted to rooting out corruption and cracking down on cronyism, or so-called parachute appointments. Minimizing government regulations is another major goal laid out by President Park. She had wanted to get rid of 1/5 of all government regulations by the end of her term in 2018. But some pundits say this goal will be hard to meet, given that the ferry disaster was blamed partly on a lack of safety-related regulations. Senior government officials say, however, that they will continue to take out unnecessary regulations. Finally, President Park has vowed to create an innovative economy. Helped by the government's drive to promote startups, the number of newly established businesses in the first quarter this year exceeded 20,000 for the first time in 14 years. The government is also looking to provide assistance to businesses in every stage of growth. Yoo Li-an, Arirang News.
Now we shift our focus to the nation's top office. With last week's local elections done and dusted, President Park Geun-hye is expected to push ahead with her much-anticipated reshuffle of the cabinet and her presidential office aides. And a new prime minister nominee could be named as early as today. Our Kim In-ji has this report.
President Park Geun-hye will likely announce her pick to fill the vacant prime minister's seat as early as this Monday. With the local elections out of the way, the president is expected to speed up the cabinet reshuffle in response to public criticism of the government's lax handling of April's ferry disaster. Sources say President Park has been searching for a candidate with an innovative mind and ethical integrity. This comes after a previous Prime Minister nominee, An Dae-hee, withdrew last month amid criticism over the amount of money he earned in the private sector after retiring as a Supreme Court justice.
국가 개혁의 적임자로 국민들께서 요구하고 있는 분을 찾고 있습니다.
The president has been mulling over potential candidates as she seeks to press ahead with her reform agenda. Among the candidates under consideration are Kim Myung-ran, former head of the Anti-Corruption and Civil Rights Commission, as well as Cho Moo-jae, a former Supreme Court justice. With the ruling Saenuri Party failing to grab winning tickets from the Chungcheong-do provinces at the local elections, candidates from these provinces are also being considered, including Shim Dae-pyong, the chairman of the Presidential Committee on Local Autonomy Development. A reshuffle is also imminent at the presidential office. President Park on Sunday tapped Yoon Do-hyun as the new senior presidential press secretary after a close aide stepped down from the post as he's reportedly considering running in a by-election next month. Yoon, the head of YTN Plus, a digital contents provider, was noted by the presidential office for his balanced way of thinking and sharp analytical skills as a journalist.
Yoon was appointed as he's the right person to explain government reform policies to the public and receive their understanding and cooperation.
A review process is also underway for other presidential aides to be replaced. Kim In-ji, Arirang News.
It's been nearly 2 months since the Sewol-ho ferry capsized and then sank off Korea's southwestern coast, taking with it more than 300 people. Now, around-the-clock search operations, which have encountered a number of setbacks in recent weeks, do continue today. And with more favorable conditions in the area since Sunday, 2 more bodies have been recovered. Here's our Kwon So-hwa with the latest.
The number of missing is shrinking, and the number of confirmed dead is rising. With waters around Jindo Island in the southwest of the country at their calmest on Sunday, rescue divers recovered a male body at around 11:30 p.m. from the 4th floor of the sunken vessel. It was identified through DNA testing on Monday as a Tanwon High School student. A female victim, identified as a Tanwon High School teacher who had stayed on the ship and saved 19 students, was retrieved on the 3rd floor cafeteria of the ship Sunday morning. The government's disaster response headquarters has decided on a 3-step plan for recovery operations moving forward. Up until the 20th, divers will continue to search the cabins. After that date, remotely operated vehicles and sound navigation and ranging methods will be used for harder-to-reach locations. Additional equipment designed to ensure that bodies aren't carried out of the ship by currents is also expected to be installed. Meanwhile, the trial for the 15 crew members of the Sewol-ho ferry who were indicted last month for abandoning the passengers on board will begin on Tuesday in Gwangju District Court. 4 of them, including Captain Lee Jun-seok, are charged with homicide by willful negligence. Kwon So-hwa, Arirang News.
Now, South Korea says it's working with Thai authorities to secure the release of 13 North Koreans who were arrested in Thailand while trying to defect. An official from Seoul's foreign ministry says that the South Korean embassy in Hanoi is looking into the matter. Now, they say they believe that the would-be defectors will be released and allowed to transit to a third country following an investigation by Thai authorities. It is again believed that the group, which includes 2 children, crossed into Thailand after passing through China and Laos with hopes of finding asylum. Meanwhile, Pakistan's busiest airport was the scene of a deadly battle between security forces and armed militants on Sunday. At least 20 and as many as 28 people have been reported killed, and there are reports that gunfire has resumed at that airport. Our Shin Se-min reports on the initial assault that began late Sunday evening, local time.
A well-coordinated attack by a group of terrorists at Pakistan's busiest airport that has killed at least 20 people so far is apparently not over. Security forces in Pakistan say they relaunched a military operation at Karachi's Jinnah International Airport hours after claiming they had regained control of the terminal under assault. Pakistani airports have confirmed that 28 people were killed, most of them airport security personnel. The terminal was no longer being used for commercial flights, only for cargo and special VIP operations. But a spokesman for Pakistan's Civil Aviation Authority says thousands of people, including airline staff, passengers, and members of the airport security force were present when the terrorist attack began. Police and army officials say a group of 10 armed gunmen initially entered the airport using fake IDs, and at least 1 aircraft was destroyed in a gunfight that involved machine guns, grenades, and a rocket launcher. As of now, all operations at the terminal remain suspended and all flights entering the airport are being diverted. The Pakistani Taliban has officially claimed responsibility for the deadly attack. They say it was carried out in response to the death of its former chief who died in U.S. drone strike last November. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
A Korean nuclear reactor was temporarily shut down Monday afternoon after a problem was detected in one of its 48 control rods. Now, Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power says that reactor unit 1 at Hanul Nuclear Power Plant in the southeastern city or county of Uljin was turned off manually so that they could investigate the cause of the malfunction. This is the fourth suspension this year of a nuclear reactor in Korea, which depends on its 23 reactors for about 30% of the country's electricity. Now, moving over to gas, more than 3,000 gas stations in Korea will shut down this week in protest of a new government rule that's set to go into effect next month. The Korea Oil Stations Association says Monday that some 60% of the country's total stations will strike on Thursday. They're upset over a change that will require them to file weekly reports on their purchases and sales of petroleum products. Now, gas station owners say it places additional financial burdens on them. The government says the measure will help them root out illegal practices. The association is also leaving the door open for a second day of strikes, depending on how the situation develops. The income gap between male and female workers in Korea is the widest in the developed world. Now, this according to a new report by Korea's National Assembly Research Service. OECD statistics on full-time employee wages in 2010 showed a gender income gap of a 20% here in Korea. Japan, number 2 on the list, was way below that. Hungary had the smallest income gap at less than 4%. And the report advises the government to take legislative action to narrow the income gap by offering more support to women who want to return to their careers after starting a family. A state-run think tank says that while the Korean economy is regaining its footing, April's ferry disaster continues to keep domestic consumption down. The Korea Development Institute said in its monthly report today that the nation's major economic indicators, including investment and exports, suggest a pace of moderate recovery. But it also adds that sectors related to the arts, sports, and recreation activities have weakened since the ferry disaster. Last month, the think tank cut its growth outlook for this year by 0.2 percentage points to 3.7%, citing a drop in private consumption. Foreign investors are snapping up more and more of stocks on the Korean bourse, but they are flocking to one conglomerate in particular, and it's none other than Samsung Group. And all pointers suggest that this trend will continue for the foreseeable future. Our Song Ji-sun tells us why.
Samsung Group is attracting foreign investors to the Korean bourse. Over the past 20 trading days, when Korean retail investors were sidelined, foreigners remained net buyers, pushing the benchmark Kospi index up by nearly 3%. Data released by the Korea Exchange on Monday shows a quarter of all shares bought by foreigners over the past month were those of Samsung Group companies. Foreigners now own more than 35% of all listed shares on the main bourse. Corporate analysts attribute the spiking Samsung share price to the group's improving profitability and the need for the children of Samsung Group patriarch Park Geun-hye to continue speeding up the succession process. Analysts say the rise in Samsung shares accounted for a third of the 3% gain in the Korean market's capitalization in the past month. Samsung Electronics has been the main target of recent purchases by foreigners, who now control more than half of the company. The tech firm now accounts for 18% of the main bourse's total market cap. Foreigners kept buying Samsung shares since Samsung chairman Park Geun-hye was hospitalized in May following a heart attack, on hopes the group's ongoing reorganization and transfer of the company's control to its 3 children could yield capital gains. In a move widely seen speeding up the succession, Samsung SDS and Samsung Everland recently announced plans for initial public offerings by next March. After their IPOs, Samsung Group affiliates could account for over 30% of the market capitalization of all listed companies. Experts say the bullish foreign buying will continue in the near future, given their preferences to invest in safer companies like Samsung, coupled with expectations Samsung will benefit from the U.S. economic recovery. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
Now, moving on to the currency exchange, the Korean won has hit its highest level against the Chinese yuan in nearly 3 years. The Korean currency was hovering around 163.2 won to the yuan late Monday morning, appreciating by nearly 10% since the beginning of February. The won's value is the highest against the yuan since July 2011. Now, Korean exporters say they are worried about the strengthening won as it will hurt their price competitiveness against Chinese rivals at a time when their shipments to China show signs of falling. Korea's trade ministry says that Korean exports to China fell by more than 9% to $11.3 billion in May from a year earlier. Well, the FIFA World Cup kicks off in Brazil in just a few days' time, and Koreans are, of course, well known around the world for feverish support of Team Korea. Well, although everything is ready for people to enjoy the games, festivities are likely to be toned down this year in the wake of the recent ferry disaster. Our Polly explains.
Here in the capital, Seoul, many sports retailers are unusually quiet despite the World Cup being just around the corner. Large advertisement banners and over-the-top promotional events have been absent from storefronts. It's part of a conscious choice by many football fans and businesses to tone down celebrations as the country continues to deal with the shock and grief from April's Sewol-ho ferry sinking.
The atmosphere was really great during the World Cup 4 years ago. But even with a few days left with the World Cup, there's no atmosphere of excitement. Many people don't feel like it's the World Cup.
Official corporate sponsors of the upcoming World Cup are also adjusting their marketing campaigns in Korea to reflect public sentiment. For example, many are using televised ads with gentler music and subdued visuals.
Given the recent national sentiment, we're proceeding with a calmer tone. Our TV advertisements are colorful and have a lively atmosphere. However, we're moving forward with a message that has a softer mood.
Major department store chains are also taking a different approach, with World Cup-themed fashion shows and cartoon exhibitions featuring famous South American artists.
As you know, there are many people who are suffering from the Sewol-ho disaster. Through this exhibition, we want to give people a chance to heal and support each other.
The opening match for the World Cup will kick off on June 12th, while Korea will face off against Russia in their first match on June 17th. But unlike in past years, the official supporters group, the Red Devils, won't be launching large-scale rallies through the streets of Seoul. Nonetheless, millions of fans at home and abroad will be cheering on the Korean men's national team, albeit with a heavy heart. Paul Yi, Arirang News.
Well, for those of you who watched and remember what we discussed in last week's final episode of this segment, yes, we were discussing the economic impact from the nation's latest local elections. Now, today we want to follow up with more details and depth. Let's bring in our regular contributor, Dr. Kim Byung-ju. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
So you're seeing this time that there aren't many gigantic infrastructure building projects promised. However, there are a few exceptions worth mentioning.
Right, indeed. We have to talk about this because after the overall calculation over the weekend, analysts were saying there is a gap of 60 trillion won difference between what local government officials newly elected have promised during this campaign and what central government has in their pockets. So this is a big issue. For example, the new re-elected governor of Gyeongnam province, the South Gyeongsang province governor Hong Jun-pyo, he has been talking about during his campaign a huge new development project for the region together with new growth engine industry projects and so on. These are all together supposed to be costing about 30 trillion won, and out of 30 trillion, 20 trillion won will have to come from the central government. So they're saying this is huge gap that needs to be covered. And also, the newly elected mayor of Incheon, city of Incheon, Yoo Jung-bok, has been talking about this fast train, super speed train connecting Incheon to Gangneung, the site nearby the Winter Olympic Games. And he has not revealed how much it will cost, but everyone knows it will be a huge extra project that we will be talking about. And also, Mayor of Busan, newly elected Mayor of Busan, Seo Byung-soo, has been talking about going ahead with this old project that has been discussed for some time, a new airport for Busan area. And this will cost about altogether 6 trillion won throughout several years, and at least during his tenure, there will be at least 1 trillion won that will be needed. And all this these are some of the examples of the major projects. By the way, as you mentioned, relatively speaking, fewer than the last local election time we had 4 years ago, but still, these are large infrastructure building projects that they're talking about.
Right. We definitely hope that they aren't empty promises, but at the same time, we're worried about them getting filled too, because we'll need a lot more money for them to carry out this. And several local leaders, elected and re-elected, they have tapped on the keyword job creation and promised large projects which will create more jobs.
Right, indeed. A lot of economists say, like a local government leaders talking about job creation is actually a little bit oxymoronic, meaning that local government heads do not have much leverage in terms of creating new jobs. But still, the promises are promises. Seo Byung-soo, once again, the newly elected mayor of Busan, he has been talking about a project that will create additional 200,000 new jobs, and that will cost about 8 trillion won altogether as a new budget. And also a newly elected governor of northern Gyeongsang province, Kim Kwan-young, he's been talking about job creation project that will have to cost about 6 trillion won. So and also here, sitting in Seoul, Park Geun-hye, he has been talking about increasing the number of people working in city welfare positions, doubling it. And that's another huge, cost we are talking about. But he doesn't have the bill ready, how much it will cost. So in terms of not only the infrastructure project that we have just talked about, but also this kind of job creation projects will cost a lot of money as well if they have to be delivered as promised.
Right. But again, when these job creation and infrastructure projects need to rely on central government funding, and there is no guarantee that that the promised results will be delivered. For instance, if they cannot get the support from the central government, what are they going to do?
Yeah, two-part question. Number one, first of all, it will be very difficult for them to get all the money that they have promised, because what they have to go through is they have to contact or work with the ministries, separate ministries that are related to this kind of project first, and these central ministries will have to submit their bills to the finance ministry. And through those steps, there are all these barriers. And then finally, even if finance ministry approves these bills, it will have to go through National Assembly. So there are a lot of barriers that needs to be overcome. And if it doesn't work out, what could happen is actually these local governments can actually ask these locally located public corporations to take upon this kind of job. And this happened big time 4 years ago. And then now what's happening is that there are about 396 different kinds of local public corporations. And their debt has increased by about close to 60% over the past 4 years. Since the last local election. This is all because this local government have asked their local public corporations to undertake this kind of project and then take upon themselves as their own debt, this public corporation's debt. So this, they say, is a kind of typical Korean disease that needs to be repaired, fixed, and addressed this time, but looks like a repetition might be quite necessary.
Right. Well, last but not least, President Park's national agendas. Now, of course, obviously, some of them will get the boost where ruling party candidates were elected, as opposed to, others will run into troubles where the main opposition got elected.
One major project that will get the boost will be in Incheon, because we have new mayor for Incheon, elected, the governing party member elected. There, the new medical center project that President Park Geun-hye has been pushing through, which had faced opposition from the incumbent mayor, will get big boost, big time. So we'll get to see some major medical center project going in Incheon area. In the meantime, however, in Seoul, because we have this superintendent for education elected from the opposition side,
or
now
progressive
side, because we don't have the official party tie here.
Right.
But progressive side, he will oppose president's idea of relaxing the regulation, allowing the hotels being built nearby schools and so on, and that will run into much difficulties. So President Park will face some difficulties on that side. So there will be lots of pluses and minuses and different projects going ahead while others may not, as a result of this kind of, the local election this time. So a lot of different projects that needs to be sorted out according to the different calculations of what the outcome have been so far.
Well, hopefully in the end, all for the better for the citizens, the Korean nationals, and not become really a sacrifice for because of this political wrangling.
Right. When we consider the citizens' input matters a lot, we have to take the local election results this time quite seriously.
All right, Dr. Kim Byung-ju, thank you so much for today.
Thank you.
And that's your business today on this Monday. Thank you for watching, and do join us again at 6 p.m. Korea time on Early Edition at 6.